This is the Watchman giving a clarion call. And this week I wanted to take time to speak about the U.S. political scene, specifically Donald Trump and recent events in the race for the White House. Now, several months ago, I wrote an article detailing three issues that Trump greatly differed on from the globalist perspective. Those issues were trade, foreign policy, and immigration. I also predicted, after just 4 primaries, that he would win the GOP nomination for president going away. And that's precisely what happened. And those issues I identified back then have become his key linchpin issues for his entire campaign. So given how those predictions I made were correct, perhaps that gives me a little leeway in speaking more toward the events that just happened, and which will likely happen going forward. You see, roughly 10 days ago, it was reported widely in mainstream media sources, but oddly enough, not a peep from the alternative media, that Donald Trump possibly just fired a huge warning shot at the banksters. And that warning shot was this. Trump just personally insisted that the GOP add language to its platform, embracing the notion of bringing back the Glass-Steagall Act. This is a huge, huge move. But before I continue, for those who don't know what that is, what Glass-Steagall is, let's do a quick recap here. Glass-Steagall, otherwise known as the Banking Act of 1933, was a highly effective law which restricted commercial banks at lending banks from getting involved in the investment business. It kept banks what they should be. Boring. Banking should never be sexy or flashy or exciting. It should be boring. Banks should loan money, put a surcharge on that loan, and pay a return to depositors for the deposits that they leave with them, and make money on the spread. Nothing pretty, nothing fancy, just lending and paying. But that's not what happened in the 1920s and 30s. Banks had absolutely overstepped their bounds and had gotten involved with investing, with Wall Street, with speculation, and found ever greater ways to lever up that cash, to leverage their bets and stocks, with depositors' money, of course. And when those bets went sour in the crash of '29, those banks were dropping like flies. You thought you saw panic, brothers, in 2008 through 2010 when a few hundred banks ultimately failed? Well, yes, that was bad. But in the 1930s, thousands of banks were bleeding out onto the ground. In fact, in 33 alone, the year Glass-Steagall was passed, over 4,000 banks failed and failed hard. When those banks failed, however, they took mom and pop's life savings with them every time. Entire families, communities, entire swaths of American citizens were ruined. Their life savings burned in a massive, unholy bonfire to the god of criminal chicanery and market rigging that flourished in the City of London and Wall Street. We're talking biblical levels of wealth destruction here. Okay, over 9,000 banks in the U.S. ended up failing before all was said and done. And as those banking carcasses circled the drain of irrelevance, they sucked down a mind-blowing $140 billion of capital. Utter nightmare. 140 billion. You understand, brothers, that this was in the 1930s. 140 billion is still a nation-destroying sum today. Yet this was 80 years ago, when the dollar was defined as a 20th of an ounce of gold. Gold was roughly $20 per ounce. Today, gold is 65 times higher than that. So at $1,300, to put their losses in perspective, multiply $140 billion times 65. Brothers, that's roughly $10 trillion that vanished in roughly 5 years' time. All because big banks plowed the life savings of farmers, of teachers, of artisans, of preachers, miners, and steelworkers into the biggest stock market bubble in U.S. history up till that point in time. Now, those banks didn't care. They're run by the same socios who run the shell game today. To hell with the common man, right? Who cares how many countless unfortunate families we ruin? That we bankrupt? Who cares how many suicides we caused? Just so long as we can keep betting on stocks, keep rigging those stocks, keep pumping that cash, and keep the con game flowing. Glass-Steagall greatly helped restore sanity and keeping those banks from burning Ma and Pa's life savings in that Wall Street bonfire. That is, until 1999, when President Clinton signed legislation repealing those common sense restrictions and allowed Wall Street to become a fat, blood-sucking brood of vampires, siphoning off the lifeblood of yet another generation of savers. This, my friends, is the law that Trump just insisted be brought back to the GOP platform. This is the first time in years that the GOP will have included this kind of banking reform language in its platform, and it's a big deal. Oh, Watchman, you're just drinking the Kool-Aid. Trump's as establishment as they come, and he'll never do anything to hurt his many friends in New York on Wall Street, who helped his business get where it is. Okay, folks, first of all, if Donald Trump was, quote, as establishment as it gets, Wall Street would be lining up behind him with mounds of cash, literal mountains. They'd be throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at him. But they're not. They're lining up behind Hillary. Okay? If Donald Trump was uber establishment, the neocons would be lining up behind him. But they're not. In fact, there's a massive exodus of neocons from the GOP party lining up behind Hillary. And isn't that beautiful, by the way? Ron Paul, who gave the neocons fits of nightmares all his life, always dreamed of purging the neocons, but was never able to achieve this purge in neocon leadership in the GOP that we're now witnessing happen with Trump. Listen, the Bushes hate Trump. The Clintons hate Trump. The Romneys hate Trump. Obamas hate Trump. Lindsey Graham hates him. Bill Kristol hates him. Very, very few of the big neocon faction have endorsed Trump, with a few exceptions for survival purposes. Yes, it's true that Trump is a man who had to use debt, who had to use leverage, who had to use Wall Street and his New York City connections to build his real estate empire. But it's now also obvious that those same power brokers, when faced with a choice between Hillary and Trump, all prefer Hillary over Trump. Hands down. Not even close. And isn't that something? Why is that? It's because Trump is his own man. Whatever decision he makes, make no mistake, it will be his decision, not some donors, not some lobbyists, not some foundations, not some round tables. It will be his. And I have to admit, that's refreshing to see. Well, yes, but Watchman, Trump is simply trying to overshadow Hillary by harping on Bernie's talking points about the dangers of Wall Street banking. He's only doing this to reach out to Libertarian and Bernie voters. Well, yes, that's partly true. This is a strategic play and a darn good one at that. But give the man credit where it's due. He didn't have to do any of this. He owes no one anything. Okay, he didn't have to bring Glass-Steagall back into the spotlight again for the first time after all these years, but he did. He didn't have to highlight the problems with the conflict of interests in modern banking between the depositors, the banking shareholders, and that bank's own trade book. But he did. He did do that. So say what you will about Trump, but many things that he has done have had a very positive effect on the public's awakening and understanding of key issues where the globalists have been raping them without challenge for years. And he didn't have to do any of it. And now, think of this. Now that the news is coming hot and heavy during the Democratic convention about WikiLeaks proving that Hillary and Wasserman Schultz and other apparatchiks completely rigged the primaries against Bernie. I mean, totally third world banana republic stuff. About voicemail revelations that show they're still scheming and plotting this very minute. About Hillary choosing Kane as her running mate. Remember, Kane is the Democratic poster child for banking deregulation. The man is the ultimate DNC enemy of bills just like Glass-Steagall. And believe me, Wall Street is very happy that Hillary chose him. This is time to go for the kill, and Trump senses it, and he has made the most of this opportunity. The total optics of what just happened isn't lost on millions and millions of normal Democratic voters, too, by the way. They are disgusted. It's why they've now had to pay less than minimum wage earnings to fill the delegate seats with fake delegates and fake cheerleaders at the DNC convention. Has this ever happened before in history? Such division, such censorship that vast swaths of their cheap seats had to be filled with actors? Brothers, we're likely at the point of peak corruption. Hillary choosing to make Wasserman Schultz part of her campaign team after Schultz was proven to be totally compromised. Hillary choosing to pick Tim Kaine as her pro-banker vice president. This is about as bad as it's ever been, and it's been very bad for a long, long time. They're literally spitting in the faces of their constituency now. It's almost like that moment when Blythe Masters was suddenly offered a seat at the CFTC shortly after their little dog and pony show Silver investigation found no wrongdoing whatsoever. It's just like that. Smacks of disdain for those who know and who care about actual justice. And it's in this very atmosphere that Trump chose to buck Wall Street and, more importantly, buck their millions to make Glass-Steagall part of the national conversation once again. Now, I don't know what you call that, brothers, but I call it courage. I call it vision, and I call it bold. I give the man credit where it's due. I don't agree with Trump on everything. I don't agree with him on huge military expenditures. I don't agree with him about Iran. But there are many issues where he is doing a lot of good, and Trump understands optics. He has a sixth sense for what plays well and will make the greatest impression with the greatest numbers of his potential audience. His opponents seem so totally tone deaf to the trade concerns and banking concerns of their voters. Now, it's true that Trump might very well never act upon this platform plank in the least. At least not until a crisis occurs anyway. But it also could very well be Trump's warning shot to the bankers that this will not be business as usual, that he will not be another empty suit for sale, to be controlled by pulling the right strings. And I want to make one more final point here. Never forget this. If anyone ever had the notion of truly trying to bring monetary and banking reform at this late stage of the game in this monetary system, they could never, ever campaign on it. If they got within 10 miles of the White House, they'd be taken out. They would be dealt with. If anyone ever truly wanted to turn the money changers, the globalist cabal of bankers, out of the proverbial temple as Jesus did, they'd have to do it secretly. They'd have to pull a fast one and do it without much warning. I'm not saying Trump is the man to challenge the banksters. To be fair, he hasn't campaigned on monetary reform. But I am saying that this move took courage, and it's a reminder of why he's a wild card in too many crucial areas for these parasites, these leeches, these criminals to be comfortable with him in this race. And you and I both know who he's up against in combating globalism, and he is. Knowing who his enemies are, is it any wonder why Donald Trump doesn't campaign anywhere without wearing a bulletproof vest? Would you do any less? Me neither, brothers. This is the Watchman signing out. Stay vigilant and bring the fight.